Bikers harass a grandpa at a cafe, then his secrets shock them. The small town of Oakville had seen its share of trouble, but nothing quite like the day Jackson Briggs and his gang of bikers roared into town. They descended upon the quiet streets like a swarm of locusts, their thunderous engines shattering the peace and tranquility that the residents had come to cherish. As the bikers made their way through the town, they reveled in the fear and intimidation they instilled in the hearts of the locals. They were a force to be reckoned with, and they knew it. No one dared to challenge them, for fear of the consequences that would surely follow. But there was one man who refused to be cowed by their presence. Walter Harrington, a retired military strategist, had seen his fair share of danger in his lifetime. He had faced down enemies far more formidable than a gang of reckless thugs, and he was not about to let them disrupt the peace of his beloved town. As Walter made his way to his usual corner table at the town cafe, he couldn't help but notice the bikers' presence. They were loud, obnoxious, and clearly looking for trouble. But Walter paid them no mind. He had more important things to worry about, like enjoying his daily cup of coffee and catching up with old friends. Little did he know that his quiet afternoon was about to take a drastic turn. As he settled into his seat, one of the bikers accidentally bumped into him, spilling his coffee all over the table. The biker, a burly man with a thick beard and tattoos covering his arms, turned to face Walter with a sneer. "Watch where you're going, old man," he growled, his voice dripping with menace. Walter looked up at the biker calmly, his eyes betraying no hint of fear. "I believe it was you who bumped into me," he said evenly. "Perhaps you should watch where you're going." The biker's eyes narrowed, and he took a step towards Walter, his fists clenched at his sides. The cafe fell silent, as everyone watched with bated breath to see what would happen next. Jackson Briggs, the leader of the biker gang, watched the confrontation from across the cafe with a smirk on his face. He loved nothing more than watching his boys intimidate the locals, and this old man seemed like the perfect target. He stood up from his seat and sauntered over to where Walter and the biker were standing. "Is there a problem here, boys?" he asked, his voice dripping with mock concern. The biker who had bumped into Walter turned to face Jackson, a look of relief on his face. "This old geezer was in my way," he said, jerking his thumb towards Walter. "Thinks he owns the place or something?" Jackson turned to face Walter, his eyes narrowing as he sized him up. He had to admit, the old man didn't look like much. He was thin and wiry, with a shock of white hair and a face lined with age. But there was something about the way he carried himself that gave Jackson pause. He had the bearing of a man who had seen things, who had faced down danger and come out the other side. Well, Jackson said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Looks like we've got ourselves a tough guy here, boys. What do you say we teach him a lesson in respect?" The bikers around him chuckled, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. They loved nothing more than a good fight, and this old man seemed like easy pickings. But Walter remained calm, his eyes never leaving Jackson's face. "I don't want any trouble," he said evenly. "But I won't be intimidated by the likes of you." Jackson's eyes flashed with anger, and he took a step towards Walter, his fists clenched at his sides. "You don't know who you're messing with, old man," he growled. "We run this town, and we don't take kindly to disrespect." Walter didn't flinch, even as Jackson loomed over him. He had faced down far worse than this young punk, and he wasn't about to back down now. The tension in the cafe was palpable as Jackson and his gang surrounded Walter, their eyes gleaming with malice. The other patrons watched in silent horror, afraid to intervene lest they become the bikers' next target. But Walter remained unperturbed, his posture relaxed and his gaze steady. He had spent years honing his skills as a military strategist, and he knew that the key to winning any battle was to stay calm and focused. "I'm going to give you one chance to walk away," he said, his voice low and even. "I don't want any trouble, but I won't hesitate to defend myself if necessary." Jackson let out a bark of laughter, his eyes flashing with amusement. "You think you can take us on, old man?" he sneered. "You're outnumbered and outmatched. We could crush you like a bug." But Walter wasn't intimidated. He had faced down far worse odds in his time, and he knew that numbers didn't always equal strength. He had a few tricks up his sleeve, and he was ready to use them if necessary. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," he said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I've taken on far worse than the likes of you." Jackson's face twisted with rage, and he lunged forward, his fist aimed squarely at Walter's face. But Walter was ready for him. With lightning-fast reflexes, he dodged the blow and countered with one of his own, catching Jackson squarely on the jaw. The biker stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock and pain. He had never been hit like that before, and he couldn't believe that this frail-looking old man had gotten the better of him. But Walter wasn't done yet. He knew that he needed to end this fight quickly, before the other bikers had a chance to join in. With a flurry of precise strikes, he took down 2 more of the gang members, leaving them groaning on the floor. The rest of the bikers backed away, their eyes wide with fear and respect. They had never seen anyone fight like that before, and they knew that they were no match for Walter's skills. As the remaining bikers fled the cafe, their tails tucked between their legs, Walter calmly returned to his seat and picked up his coffee cup. He had barely broken a sweat during the fight, and he was ready to finish his drink and get on with his day. But the other patrons in the cafe were not so quick to move on. They stared at Walter in awe, their mouths agape with shock and admiration. They had never seen anyone stand up to the bikers like that before, and they couldn't believe that this unassuming old man had been the one to do it. As the news of Walter's exploits spread throughout the town, people began to whisper about him in hushed tones. Some said that he was a retired spy, while others claimed that he had once been a member of an elite military unit. But no one knew the truth about Walter's past, and he preferred to keep it that way. However, there were a few people in town who did know about Walter's history. They were his old friends and colleagues, men and women who had served alongside him in the military and who knew firsthand what he was capable of. When they heard about what had happened at the cafe, they knew that they needed to step in and help. They couldn't let Walter face this threat alone, not after everything he had done for them over the years. So they began to gather, coming from all corners of the town and beyond. They were a motley crew of ex-soldiers, law enforcement officers, and even a few unlikely allies who had once been on the wrong side of the law. But they all had one thing in common, a deep respect and admiration for Walter Harrington. As they made their way to the cafe, ready to stand beside their old friend and face down the bikers once and for all, Walter couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and gratitude. He had always known that he could count on his friends when the chips were down, and today was no exception. The bikers, still reeling from their humiliating defeat at the hands of Walter, regrouped at their hideout on the outskirts of town. Jackson was furious, his pride wounded and his ego bruised. He couldn't believe that he had been bested by an old man, and he was determined to get his revenge. As he paced back and forth, his mind racing with plans and schemes, his second-in-command, a burly man named Tank, approached him cautiously. "Boss, I don't think this is a good idea," he said, his voice hesitant. "That old man, he's not like the others. He's got skills, and he's got friends. If we go after him again, we might not come out on top." But Jackson wasn't listening. He was too consumed by his own anger and embarrassment to heed Tank's warning. He had always been the top dog in town, feared and respected by all, and he wasn't about to let some geriatric geezer take that away from him. "We're going back," he growled, his eyes flashing with determination. "And this time, we're not going to hold back. We're going to teach that old man a lesson he'll never forget." Meanwhile, back at the cafe, Walter and his friends were busy making plans of their own. They knew that the bikers would be back, and they needed to be ready for them. As they huddled together, sharing ideas and strategies, Walter couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and camaraderie. These were his people, his brothers and sisters in arms, and he knew that he could count on them no matter what. But even as they planned and prepared, Walter knew that the real battle was yet to come. The bikers were just the tip of the iceberg, a symptom of a much larger problem that had been festering in Oakville for years. He knew that if they were going to truly make a difference, they would need to do more than just fight off a few thugs. They would need to inspire change, to show the people of Oakville that they had the power to stand up for themselves and create a better future. As the sun began to set over Oakville, the tension in the air was palpable. The bikers were on the move, their engines roaring as they tore through the streets, heading straight for the cafe where Walter and his friends were waiting. But Walter was ready for them. He had spent the last few hours going over every possible scenario, every potential outcome, and he had a plan in place for each and every one. As the bikers pulled up outside the cafe, their tires screeching against the pavement, Walter stepped out to meet them. He was flanked by his friends, a formidable group of men and women who had seen their fair share of combat and were ready to fight alongside him. Jackson dismounted his bike, his eyes narrowed and his fists clenched. He had come prepared this time, with a group of his toughest and most loyal followers at his back. He was determined to put an end to Walter's interference once and for all. But as he strode forward, ready to engage in battle, something unexpected happened. From every corner of the town, people began to emerge, stepping out of their homes and businesses to stand alongside Walter and his friends. They were young and old, men and women, rich and poor. They were the people of Oakville, the ones who had been living in fear of the bikers for far too long. And now, they were ready to take a stand. As Jackson and his gang looked around in disbelief, they realized that they were outnumbered and outmatched. They had always relied on fear and intimidation to keep the people in line, but now, faced with a united front of determined citizens, they began to falter. Walter stepped forward, his voice calm and steady as he addressed the crowd. "This is our town," he said, his words ringing out clear and true. "And we won't let anyone take that away from us. Not the bikers, not anyone. We stand together, and we fight for what's right." And with those words, the battle began. The fight was fierce and brutal, with both sides giving as good as they got. The bikers were tough and ruthless, but the people of Oakville were fighting for something greater than themselves. They were fighting for their homes, their families, and their way of life. As the battle raged on, Walter found himself face to face with Jackson once again. The two men circled each other warily, their eyes locked in a fierce stare down. "You think you're some kind of hero, don't you?" Jackson sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think you can save this town, make everything better?" But Walter just smiled, his eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "I don't think I'm a hero," he said, his voice calm and steady. "I'm just a man who knows what's right, and who's willing to fight for it." With those words, he lunged forward, his fists flying as he engaged Jackson in a brutal hand-to-hand combat. The two men traded blows, each one determined to come out on top. But even as they fought, Walter couldn't help but feel a sense of sadness for Jackson. He knew that the young man had been led astray, that he had never had the guidance or the support that he needed to become a better person. And so, even as he fought with all his might, Walter began to speak to Jackson, his voice low and earnest. "It's not too late," he said, dodging a blow and countering with one of his own. "You can still change, still make things right." Jackson faltered for a moment, his eyes widening in surprise. He had never had anyone speak to him like that before, with such compassion and understanding. But before he could respond, the battle took a turn for the worse. One of the bikers, a man named Ripper, had managed to get his hands on a gun, and he was now pointing it directly at Walter's head. Time seemed to slow down as Ripper's finger tightened on the trigger, and Walter knew that he had only seconds to act. With a burst of speed and agility that belied his age, he dove to the side, just as the gun went off. The bullet missed him by inches, but it was enough to send the crowd into a panic. People screamed and scattered, and for a moment, it looked as though the bikers might actually win the day. But Walter wasn't about to let that happen. With a roar of defiance, he charged forward, his fists flying as he took down Ripper and his cohorts one by one. As the dust settled and the smoke cleared, it became apparent that the tide had turned in favor of the people of Oakville. The bikers were scattered and demoralized, their once fearsome reputation in tatters. Jackson lay on the ground, his face bruised and bloodied, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger and despair. He had always believed that he was untouchable, that he could do whatever he wanted without consequence. But now, faced with the reality of his defeat, he began to realize just how wrong he had been. Walter stood over him, his expression one of sadness rather than triumph. "It didn't have to be this way," he said, his voice soft and regretful. "You could have been so much more than this, Jackson. You could have been a leader, a force for good in this world." Jackson looked up at him, his eyes filled with confusion and pain. "I don't understand," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Why did you help me? Why did you care?" Walter smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Because I believe in second chances," he said, reaching out a hand to help Jackson to his feet. "And because I know that everyone has the potential to change, to become better than they were before." Jackson hesitated for a moment, his pride warring with his desire for something more. But in the end, he took Walter's hand, allowing himself to be pulled to his feet. Around them, the people of Oakville were celebrating their victory, their voices raised in songs of joy and triumph. But Walter knew that the real work was just beginning. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. He knew that they would need to work together, to build a stronger and more united community if they were going to prevent something like this from happening again. They would need to address the root causes of the problem, to provide opportunities and support for those who had been left behind. But for now, he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction, a moment to bask in the glow of what they had accomplished. They had stood together, and they had emerged victorious. And that, he knew, was something worth celebrating. In the days that followed, Oakville underwent a transformation. The people who had once lived in fear of the bikers, Chapter 9 continued, 336 words. Now walked the streets with their heads held high, secure in the knowledge that they had the power to shape their own destiny. Walter and his friends worked tirelessly to help rebuild the community, reaching out to those who had been most affected by the bikers' reign of terror. They organized neighborhood watch groups and community events, bringing people together in a way that had never been possible before. Even Jackson and some of his former gang members found themselves drawn into the effort, their once destructive energy channeled into more positive pursuits. Under Walter's guidance, they began to see the value in being a part of something greater than themselves, in working towards a common goal. As the weeks turned into months, Oakville began to thrive in a way that it never had before. New businesses opened up, and old ones flourished. People from all walks of life came together to celebrate their shared humanity, their shared hopes and dreams. And at the center of it all was Walter, the quiet, unassuming man who had started it all. He watched with pride as his beloved town blossomed and grew, knowing that he had played a part in making it happen. But even as he celebrated their success, Walter knew that the work was far from over. There would always be challenges to face, always be those who sought to sow discord and division. But he also knew that as long as the people of Oakville stood together, as long as they remained committed to the ideals of compassion, unity, and hope, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. And so, with a smile on his face and a song in his heart, Walter set out to face the future, ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. He knew that he had the strength and the wisdom to guide his community through whatever storms may come, and he was ready to do whatever it took to keep Oakville safe, strong, and united. As the months passed, Oakville continued to thrive under Walter's guidance. The once sleepy town had become a beacon of hope and resilience, a shining example of what could be achieved when people worked together towards a common goal. But even as the community celebrated its newfound strength, Walter knew that there was still work to be done. He had seen firsthand the devastating impact that poverty, lack of education, and limited opportunities could have on a person's life, and he was determined to do something about it. He began to work with local leaders and organizations to develop programs and initiatives designed to address these issues head-on. They established job training programs and mentorship opportunities, providing young people with the skills and support they needed to succeed in life. They also worked to improve access to education, partnering with schools and community centers to provide resources and support for students of all ages. Walter knew that education was the key to breaking the cycle of poverty and despair, and he was determined to do everything in his power to make sure that every child in Oakville had the opportunity to learn and grow. As these programs took root and began to bear fruit, Walter watched with pride as a new generation of leaders emerged from within the community. Young people who had once been lost and adrift now stood tall and proud, ready to take on the challenges of the world with confidence and determination. And at the center of it all was the community itself, the beating heart of Oakville. Walter knew that it was the strength and resilience of the people that had made all of this possible, and he was humbled and grateful to be a part of it. He knew that there would always be challenges to face, always be obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that as long as the people of Oakville stood together, as long as they remained committed to the ideals of compassion, unity, and hope, there was nothing they couldn't achieve. And so, with a smile on his face and a song in his heart, Walter looked to the future, ready for whatever lay ahead. He knew that Oakville was in good hands, and he was proud to be a part of its ongoing story of transformation and triumph. Years later, Walter sat on his porch, watching as the sun began to set over the hills of Oakville. He was an old man now, his hair white and his face lined with the passing of time. But his eyes still sparkled with the same warmth and wisdom that had always been there, the same fierce determination to make the world a better place. As he sat there, lost in thought, a young man approached him, his face filled with a mixture of nervousness and admiration. Walter recognized him instantly. It was Jackson, the former leader of the biker gang that had once terrorized Oakville. But Jackson was a different man now, his once hardened features softened by the passage of time and the weight of experience. He had been one of the first to benefit from the programs and initiatives that Walter had helped to establish, and he had used that opportunity to turn his life around in ways that he had never thought possible. "Walter," Jackson said, his voice filled with emotion. "I just wanted to thank you for everything you've done for me, for this community. I know I didn't make it easy for you, but you never gave up on me. You showed me that there was another way, a better way." Walter smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You did the hard work, Jackson," he said, his voice warm and sincere. "You made the choice to change, to be better. I just helped to show you the way." Jackson nodded, his eyes filling with tears. "I wouldn't be where I am today without you," he said. "None of us would. You changed everything, Walter. You gave us hope." Walter reached out and took Jackson's hand, squeezing it gently. "Hope is a powerful thing," he said. "It can move mountains and change lives. And it's something that we all have within us, just waiting to be awakened." Jackson nodded, his face filled with a newfound sense of purpose and determination. He knew that he still had a long way to go, but with Walter's guidance and the support of his community, he knew that anything was possible. And as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Walter knew that he had played his part in helping to create something truly special, a community that was stronger, more resilient, and more united than ever before. And for that, he would always be grateful. As the years continued to pass, Walter watched with pride as Oakville flourished and grew. The once divided town had become a model of unity and cooperation, a shining example of what could be achieved when people work together towards a common goal. But even as he celebrated the town's success, Walter knew that there was still more work to be done. He had always believed that true change started from within, and he knew that it was up to each and every person in Oakville to continue the work that he had started. And so, he began to focus his efforts on mentoring the next generation of leaders, sharing with them the wisdom and experience that he had gained over a lifetime of service. He worked with young people from all walks of life, helping them to develop the skills and confidence they needed to make a difference in the world. Among those young leaders was Sarah, a brilliant and compassionate young woman who had grown up in the shadow of the bikers' reign of terror. But rather than letting that experience define her, Sarah had used it as a source of strength and motivation, determined to create a better future for herself and her community. Under Walter's guidance, Sarah began to emerge as a powerful voice for change, working tirelessly to address the root causes of poverty and inequality in Oakville. She organized community meetings and rallied her peers to action, inspiring them with her vision of a brighter, more just future. And as he watched Sarah and the other young leaders of Oakville take up the mantle of change, Walter knew that his work was far from finished. He knew that there would always be challenges to face, always be obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that as long as there were people like Sarah and Jackson and all the others who had been touched by his message of hope and unity, Oakville would continue to thrive. And so, with a sense of pride and purpose, Walter looked to the future, ready to continue his work of building a better world, one community at a time. He knew that the road ahead would not be easy, but he also knew that with the strength and resilience of the people of Oakville behind him, anything was possible. As the sun began to set on another day in Oakville, Walter found himself walking through the streets of the town he had called home for so many years. Everywhere he looked, he saw signs of the progress and change that had taken place since those fateful days when he had first stood up to the bikers. The once boarded-up storefronts were now thriving businesses, their windows filled with colorful displays and their doors open to customers from all walks of life. The parks and public spaces were filled with families and friends, enjoying the simple pleasures of life in a community that had learned to come together. And as he walked, Walter was filled with a sense of deep gratitude and fulfillment. He knew that he had played a part in helping to create this new reality, but he also knew that it was the people of Oakville themselves who had made it all possible. They had been the ones who had stood up to the bikers, who had rallied around Walter and his message of hope and unity. They had been the ones who had put in the hard work of rebuilding their community, brick by brick and person by person. And now, as he looked around at the vibrant, thriving town that Oakville had become, Walter knew that his work was done. He had helped to plant the seeds of change, but it was up to the next generation to nurture those seeds and help them grow. As he made his way back to his quiet little house on the outskirts of town, Walter felt a sense of peace and contentment wash over him. He knew that he had lived a good life, a life filled with purpose and meaning. And he knew that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, the people of Oakville would always have the strength and resilience to face them head-on. With a smile on his face and a song in his heart, Walter sat down on his front porch, ready to watch the sun set on another day in the town he loved. He knew that the future was bright, and he was grateful to have been a part of building it. Years turned into decades, and Oakville continued to thrive under the leadership of its new generation of heroes. Walter watched from afar as Sarah and Jackson and all the others he had mentored took up the mantle of change, working tirelessly to build a better world for themselves and for generations to come. And though he was no longer the central figure he had once been, Walter knew that his legacy would live on through the countless lives he had touched and the countless hearts he had inspired. He spent his days in quiet reflection, tending to his garden and sharing stories with the neighborhood children who would gather around him, eager to hear tales of the legendary Walter Harrington and his fight against the bikers. And as he sat in his rocking chair, watching the sun dip below the horizon and the stars emerge in the darkening sky, Walter knew that he had lived a life well lived. He had faced down evil and emerged victorious, not through violence or force, but through the power of compassion, unity, and hope. He had shown the world that one person, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, could make a difference. That one act of kindness, one moment of bravery, could change the course of history. And though he knew that his time on this earth was drawing to a close, Walter also knew that his spirit would live on through the countless lives he had touched and the countless hearts he had inspired. With a final smile and a final breath, Walter closed his eyes and drifted off into a peaceful slumber, secure in the knowledge that he had made the world a better place, one small act of kindness at a time. And as the people of Oakville mourned the loss of their beloved hero, they also celebrated the incredible legacy he had left behind, a legacy of hope, compassion, and the unshakable belief that, together, we can build a better world for ourselves and for generations to come.